Boys Club: Patriarchy and Issues of Gender Representation in 21st Century Jazz. A presentation by Jonah Karsh. When I was in high school, my mom made an observation that I hadn't ever noticed. While my school's concert band was roughly equally made up of males and females, the jazz band was only ever about a quarter women. When I arrived as a jazz piano major at Frost, the gender disparity continued, and was so striking that I couldn't miss it. In a program of about 100 undergraduates, only 2 jazz instrumentalists were women, and there were no female jazz instrumental faculty. It turns out this is not a coincidence. The underrepresentation of women in jazz is a well-documented social science phenomenon. A 2002 study of college band students across 15 universities found that 52% of women, compared to 80% of men, played jazz in high school, while in college only 14% of women had played jazz, while half of the men had. To me, this gender gap in jazz is a big problem. I wondered, how can musicians be so vulnerable and convey an emotional message when they are leaving out the voices of more than half of the world's population? With this in mind, I sought out to research the reasons for jazz's gender disparities. Could it be that women are just not cut out for jazz? I've heard some say that jazz might just be a more masculine form of music. Successful improvisation requires the stereotypically masculine traits of risk-taking and strong confidence, which some say men do more naturally. One study even found that female students are more anxious about learning to improvise. My jazz piano teacher in high school, a woman, once played a gig with the great vocalist Joe Williams, who told her he was going to hire a sub, but she was good for a girl. Women are good at jazz, though. To demonstrate this, let's play a game. I will now play a 2-minute clip of a recent jazz recording. There are 2 solos on the recording, one played by a man and the other by a woman. Can you tell which is which? Take a second to listen. You probably have no idea who is who after listening to this recording. The trumpet soloist on the recording emphasizes an arc in their solo, using higher notes and louder dynamics as the solo progresses. This is typical of many post-bop jazz solos like this, but the trumpeter is also unusual in that they use a rounder, more spread timbre in their lower register than is customarily found in this style. The piano soloist several times makes use of melodic sequences, repeating a melodic and rhythmic shape starting from a different pitch. The pianist also makes use of a minor blues sound, employing the flat third and seventh and sharp four of the blues scale over a minor key center. This is all great information, but tells us nothing about what the gender of the musicians might be. Either way, it is clear that, gender irrelevant, both performers are demonstrating an extremely high level of musicianship, dispelling the notion that women can't play jazz. To reveal, the trumpeter was Ingrid Jensen, a woman, and the pianist was Rainer Boehm, a man, playing on a tune called Lost in Fargo. Clearly, the argument that women can't play is full of baloney, but it is based on an idea called gender essentialism, an idea that each gender is by its inherent nature better suited or more prone to certain behaviors, which is not true. While one study has found that women are more nervous about learning to improvise, this is not a result of their inherent nature, but rather societal influences. Thus, in trying to find the source of gender disparities in jazz, it is better to examine the role that societal influences play, instead of women's natures. So what are some societal reasons for women's underrepresentation? For one thing, instruments are stereotyped by gender. When students choose instruments in 4th or 5th grade, boys are much more likely to choose instruments that are used in jazz band, while girls, without realizing it, limit their jazz opportunities by choosing stereotypically feminine instruments. When women then try to join the jazz band in high school or college, they are a step behind men, since they have to take up a secondary instrument in order to play jazz, all while feeling pressure from studio teachers to specialize on their primary instruments. It's more than instruments, though. Men often play a role in making women feel uncomfortable in jazz settings. In one study of a collegiate jazz band with no women, the director said, "There are 2 languages spoken in jazz ensemble, music and sarcasm, but if you don't do well with sarcasm..." In a field that is already historically male-dominated, the sarcasm itself isn't the issue here, but the sense of mutual understanding that it implies between male members of a band can make a lone female member feel left out of a boys' club. In more extreme cases, there have also been incidents of women being subject to harassment and sexually objectifying comments. This behavior by men is more widespread than many think, and discourages women from participation in jazz. Finally, an obvious reason for the lack of representation is the lack of female musician role models to begin with. My band director in high school never once mentioned female jazz musicians as luminaries of the music, and most female jazz students are never taught by a woman. If female students don't have female role models, there are less likely to be as many female musicians to perform and teach the next generation of female students, creating a vicious cycle. So what can we do about all of this? First, educators should emphasize female role models and work against instrument stereotyping. When a student is choosing an instrument in 4th grade, a director could show footage of a woman playing a traditionally male instrument and tell students that girls and boys can play any instrument they want. Additionally, as Ingrid Jensen suggests in an interview on the radio show Jazz Night in America, when a student asks a teacher which jazz musicians to check out, the teacher could include some women on the list. To help girls overcome their anxieties about improvisation, one New York band director also found that creating an all-girls ensemble of beginner jazz musicians worked as a sort of safe space, helping eliminate many girls' improvisation anxiety, and it later narrowed the gender gap in more advanced bands at his school. Second, combating the sexism, both deliberate and implicit, that pervades the jazz world is vital to narrowing the gender gap. Most jazz musicians and educational institutions are well-meaning and want to include more women, but don't realize that this will not happen unless systems of oppression are explicitly recognized and dismantled. More schools must go out of their way to make clear that they welcome women, as the Berklee College of Music did by creating an Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. Schools could also unequivocally condemn sexual harassment in music settings. A set of guidelines for dealing with sexual harassment at music institutions, created by a group of female jazz musicians called the We Have Voice Collective, is publicly available. If all of this happens, we will still have a long way to go, but jazz music will benefit from a more egalitarian group of artists. Thanks for watching.